So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Alex. Alex LoCastro is an environmental educator, an entomologist, and an artist from Orlando, Florida. Before joining Georgia Audubon, she worked as an interpretive ranger at the Fernbank Museum of Natural History, leading educational programs and engaging in habitat restoration in the largest urban old growth forest in the Piedmont region. Alex is most passionate about insects and the many vital roles they play in our environment, including keeping our native birds fed and pollinating our beautiful native flora. She's doing great work helping us expand our Georgia Audubon Wildlife Sanctuary program across the state. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex to get the program started.
All right, thank you so much, Dottie. And let me share my screen. PowerPoint, everybody can see that, correct? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. Okay, so yeah, like Dottie had mentioned, this presentation is going to be all about creating a backyard sanctuary for wildlife. Get started, like Dottie said, my name is Alex LoCastro. I'm our conservation program coordinator. There are a lot of words there, so I don't blame Dottie for mixing them up. But basically, I have a lot of different responsibilities here at Georgia Audubon. I manage our wildlife sanctuary program first and foremost, but I also manage our native plant sales, like you know, Dottie mentioned that we have one going on currently. I also work on a number of grants, including ones where I design native plant gardens for Title I schools here in Atlanta and elsewhere. And basically all kinds of different stuff relating to grants and conservation work and whatnot. So I do a little bit of everything here. Just a little bit about Georgia Audubon. If you're not already familiar, we are the region's premier organization dedicated to the preservation and enjoyment of birds. We became Georgia Audubon 2 years ago when we used to be the Atlanta Audubon Society, and now we're a statewide organization. We offer all kinds of different things all throughout the state, but I won't dwell too much on that just so we can get to the rest of the presentation, but definitely go check out all the stuff on our website because you can find the links there. A little bit about conservation down here. We do quite a number of things. We have our own habitat restoration team where we have 2 staff members there. We offer wildlife sanctuary certifications through our wildlife sanctuary program, which I'll talk about during this presentation. And we have a lot of different other initiatives that we're involved in, and actually more than are listed here currently. And currently we're still at Blue Heron Nature Preserve. That's where our office is. We are going to be moving sometime early next year, so it won't be for too much longer, but that's where you can find us for now. And yeah, like I said before, this presentation is going to go over wildlife sanctuary certification and building one in your own yard. And just real quick, our mission at Georgia Audubon is to build places where birds and people thrive. We firmly believe that, you know, as important as birds are to our environments, you know, protecting them and making sure that they stay healthy for generations to come has a huge benefit to people as well. And we approach our work through conservation, education, and community engagement. Those are the 3 main wings of our organization. Like I said before, I'm in the conservation wing, I guess, but Melissa here is in our education team. And then we also have some community engagement staff as well. Okay, so to start with, it's important to talk about why we want to build all these wildlife sanctuaries and why it's so important to include native plants in our landscaping decisions. So this is a really groundbreaking study from 2019. And basically what it showed is that over the last 50 years, since 1970, there are now 2.9 billion fewer breeding birds in North America. There's a lot of different reasons for why that is, but basically the main ones that this study identified were habitat loss as the biggest overall driver of decline. So, you know, as we continue with urban development and, you know, urban sprawl, you know, more and more land has to be cleared for the sake of houses and businesses and roads and parking lots and whatnot. So, you know, we are facing, you know, ever increasing habitat loss due to those pressures, as well as other ones listed there: agriculture, resource extraction, etc. And then the second largest driver for these population declines are habitat degradation. So that can be a number of things, but it includes invasive plants that are crowding out land that native plants need. It could also be the waterways get polluted in any number of ways. Habitat getting fragmented. So if you have one big forest and it gets cut up into little smaller pieces, that has a really drastic effect on certain bird species. And yeah, basically just anything that's making the habitat less native or less healthy and safe for our birds falls under that umbrella. So yeah, those are the two main large drivers of bird decline. So for that reason, we want to address those issues in our own programming. So right here we have a few photos of typical Georgia native environments. These are certainly not all the ones that there are here in the state of Georgia. We have a huge diversity in habitat types, but these are three of the really big ones. So on the far left-hand side, we have a native grassland. That's actually Panola State Park, where we have some habitat restoration contracts. Grasslands are definitely super threatened because a lot of them happen or occur in rural areas. And a lot of those rural areas are the places that are getting cleared for, ever increasing urban sprawl and development. Grasslands are tricky because, not everybody knows their native grasses. As many people, know native plants and stuff as far as wildflowers go, and trees, and shrubs. Grasses are a little bit more complicated. Not everybody is super well versed in them. And, they require a very specific type of management to keep them healthy. In the middle here, we have a longleaf pine ecosystem somewhere in the coastal plains in South Georgia, most likely. This is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. It's very fire dependent, so that it needs to be regularly burned, usually every year or every few years. It's a really incredible, type of environment that we have here that at one time was the largest ecosystem, at least in Eastern North America. And it's, been threatened over the years from logging and from, cutting down these forests for, the purposes of agriculture and so on and so forth. So longleaf pine ecosystems are really important, especially in the coastal plains where they occur. And then finally over here on the right-hand side, we have kind of like a mixed hardwood, maybe some softwood, old growth forests. So at one time, a lot of Atlanta at least would have been, one, big old growth forest. This one here is actually Fernbank Forest, where I used to work. And you can see, just looking at this photo, how many different layers of this forest there are. There's the canopy trees all the way up at the top. So you can see that there's vegetation spaced all throughout the mid-story, the understory, right down to the ground cover and the plants that are directly on the ground. So, these types of environments are obviously super important for birds, especially, the presence of really large mature trees is also super important. So yeah, it's important to talk about some old growth forests as well, since, so much of Atlanta at least would have been that at one time. So just real quick, these are some images from generated from that study. There's actually a website called 3billionbirds.org, I believe, that kind of summarizes the findings of that study and has like some infographics and information surrounding it. But this is just kind of at a glance, like what the number that I mentioned earlier, 3 billion fewer birds, breeding birds, what that actually means in terms of the different types of birds and the different types of environments. So definitely the most threatened are our grassland birds. Overall a 53% population loss in grassland birds since 1970. 3 in 4 eastern meadowlarks have been lost in that time. And again, it's just like, it's a pretty underappreciated type of environment. If you think about it, a lot of historical grasslands, would have gotten converted into farmland, over the last few hundred years. And then eventually, as, for instance, slavery became outlawed in America, a lot of those former plantations turned into pine plantations or some sort of other, pine forest for some, monetary gain. So, you have a lot of historical grasslands that have just turned into forests, which, isn't necessarily a super bad thing, but, if it is only, rows of pine trees and there's no other plants being grown there, it's regularly harvested, you know, it's not really adding much benefit to the environment. But anyway, with that said, there's a lot of different other types of birds that are threatened. For instance, wood thrushes, you know, we've lost 6 in 10 since 1970. They're especially sensitive to habitat fragmentation. You know, they really need large, mature forests in order to really thrive. So, you know, as those forests get carved up more and more, it's going to be a lot harder for wood thrushes to survive. Similarly, aerial insectivores are super threatened because you think about it, there's less native plants, less native habitat around for those insects to feed on and continue their life cycles. And that's going to mean less insects for the birds to eat. So, you know, if you drive around Atlanta, you'll see all kinds of mosquito spraying companies. In fact, maybe some of you even use the mosquito spraying service at your own home. But it's important to recognize that, I mean, for one thing, mosquitoes are super important ecologically speaking. They're food for all kinds of different birds and other animals. But also, there's no such thing as like a mosquito-specific insecticide. If you're treating your lawn with insecticides of any kind, it's going to kill any insects that are there, and then all the birds that depend on those insects are not going to be able to find the food that they need. And yeah, I won't get too into the weeds, but you can see just basically across all different types of our native birds, they have all been threatened significantly in some way due to all these different pressures. So it's important to talk about habitat connectivity because that's kind of like the really big idea behind the Wildlife Sanctuary program. You know, if you look at this image here, for instance, like if you can just imagine these green circles and ovals are basically supposed to represent like native habitat, but if you look here, you can see that there's all these buildings that are in the way. And the thought is that, you know, so much land in Georgia is privately owned, and especially like in urban areas, if those private homes that may have really beautiful, exotic, ornamental gardens, if they converted those into native plant gardens, it would help kind of fill these gaps here and make it a little bit easier for our birds to go get from one place to another and not have to be so isolated in like the few, you know, pieces of pristine habitat that still exists. So yeah, ensuring habitat connectivity is really important to maintaining biological diversity and preserving those ecosystems. So if you are this goldfinch here, like I said, you're going to get to this area and realize that there's not really anywhere else you can go. And you really need something to kind of like connect the dots basically in order for you to find the food that you need, in order to find like the habitat you need to nest in, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of like a visual representation of what habitat fragmentation can look like. And you'll see that, you know, a lot of this land would have been cleared for most likely turfgrass cultivation or, you know, growing sod, what have you. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, an environment like this, you know, if you're a certain type of bird in this forest, a lot of them aren't going to bother venturing across this field. You know, to them, this is basically a wasteland. There's not really much for, you know, to offer them in the way of, you know, habitat or even food for a lot of the birds. So you're going to be really restricted to this little area here of this little patch of forest. And, you know, with increased pressure like that, you know, birds are very territorial. It's going to increase, you know, conflicts between the birds. It's going to, you know, produce scarcity when it comes to resources and stuff like that. So it's going to be a really stressful situation for a lot of our birds. So again, the idea behind the Wildlife Sanctuary Program is to kind of, you know, fill in these islands of native habitat all throughout the city and also all throughout the state at this point, to make it a little bit easier on our birds and also to provide, you know, more regular native habitat. So the birds aren't having to fly as far and aren't having to face as many risks as they would have otherwise in order to get to those places. So by adding some wildflowers, some native shrubs, some native trees, if you don't have any native trees near you, it'll make it a lot easier for these birds to kind of go from place to place with minimal interruptions. So just real quick, here's, you know, for example, a screenshot of Atlanta. This is just like the road view, but if I switch to the satellite view, you can really see exactly what I'm talking about here. So, you know, the northeast side of the city, you know, we do have quite a lot of native canopy tree cover, which is really great. It keeps, you know, the temperature down and everything, but it also, you know, provides a lot of continuous habitat for a lot of our birds. especially ones that spend a lot of time in trees. But if you get over here to Midtown and downtown Atlanta, you can see that's basically just a big wall of concrete, steel, and glass, and things like that. So that if you're a bird over here and you're trying to make it to the other side of town, basically, you're going to encounter all sorts of different hazards along the way. And it's going to make it a lot harder to reach those areas. And especially, if you think about it, like, the Chattahoochee River is over here on the west side of the city. So, things like that, the birds really need that habitat. They're going to be risking a lot just by trying to cross through this area, basically. So the question is, where do we go from here? We know that habitat loss and habitat degradation are super big drivers for these bird population declines. And we have to figure out how to prioritize what would be best for our birds. So the first most important thing to do is protect what we already have. That includes like if we have larger or large old growth forests, like for instance fernbank forests. Like my intro said, it's the largest urban old growth forest in the Piedmont region. If for some reason, which it probably is never going to be, but if it was ever developed for one reason or another, that would be like a really massive loss in native habitat, because you can't really just replace a place that has 300-year-old trees and over 1,000 years of topsoil that's developed on top of it, and things of that nature. So other than just like clear cutting, though, they also face habitat degradation by things like invasive plants, like I mentioned before. So, for instance, here we have a big kudzu field. If you look closely, you can see that deer there. But the thing about kudzu and a lot of invasive plants is that they crowd out the native plants. Kudzu specifically grows over a lot of like native shrubs and trees and things like that, so that they can't get any sunlight, and it really chokes them out, and eventually just end up with a monoculture of a plant that's not really useful to most of our wildlife. So it's really important to control invasive species on these really important existing habitats that we have. Again, we want to avoid habitat fragmentation as much as possible. You definitely don't want to get like little patches of forest like this at all. And of course, you don't want to just completely lose these habitats either. It's really important to kind of stand up for these really high quality habitats to make sure that this sort of thing never happens. And then the next best thing we can do is kind of rebuild native habitat from the ground up. So a lot of places in Atlanta, at least, like I said, we have that really great native canopy tree cover that at the top of the forest, basically. But beyond that, maybe people have like a native dogwood, or maybe they have some other small native tree or shrub. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot in the lower, understory to kind of fill that stuff in. So that's why it's really important to encourage people really start from the ground up and try to include, fill in all these different gaps they might have on their property. So one thing you can do is create a little native wildflower meadow like this here. You have a whole bunch of smaller wildflowers, some larger ones. You have some shrubs here. Those might be non-native crepe myrtles, but you have some shrubs, and then you have some small trees all the way up to canopy trees. As much variety as possible is going to be really beneficial for our birds. So yeah, again, just a little bit about the Wildlife Sanctuary Program. It started when we were still the Atlanta Audubon Society. I'm not even sure, honestly, how long this program has existed. I know it's been around for decades and decades. But if you think about it, like, way back then, what it would take to become a wildlife sanctuary would probably be, putting up some bird feeders or putting up, bird houses and stuff like that. But, especially since that study came out, but, in recent years, we definitely have like acknowledged that native plants are pretty much the most important things when it comes to protecting our native birds and providing for our native birds. So really the program has changed quite a lot over time, and the program today is quite different from what it used to be. But basically our goal is to create a network of certified wildlife sanctuaries across the state. And this is actually a typo. Currently we have over 700 properties that have been certified, and there are many more in the system that are still working towards certification. So I'll get into it maybe a little bit later, but if you apply to the program, you don't necessarily have to be certifiable immediately. You'll have your assessment of your property, whether it be virtual or in person, depending on what you sign up for and depending on where you live. And basically, the volunteers will go through your property and look at what needs to be done. You'll get your recommendations. And if you're not certifiable immediately, then basically you'll be eligible for a cost-free follow-up assessment after you get those things in place so that you can eventually be certified. So, really it's all about we don't want to just turn people away and say oh, sorry, you're not good enough or whatever. We really want to enable people to make their properties more friendly to wildlife and more native, basically, because that's really the point of the whole program. We want to encourage improvement, so we're here to help with that. We have a number of requirements in the program, but the most important are these 3 sanctuary details right here. Basically, the sanctuary area should be less than half of the area should be monocultured turf grass or non-native lawn. Chances are if you have a lawn, it's a non-native grass. And it's really resource intensive. It doesn't really provide much for our native wildlife. And you might find that it's actually a lot easier to maintain like a native wildflower meadow or something like that than it is to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have your lawn mowed and blowed and have all these things added to it and pay all these different companies to maintain it for you when it's really not offering a whole lot other than maybe something to pass the ball back and forth on. So we'd like to talk about non-native turf grass and how important it is to reduce that land as much as possible. Non-native invasive plant species should be less than 1/4 of your sanctuary area. So again, they're super detrimental to native plant health and native habitat health. So it's really important to have a really small percentage of those plants, if any at all, just to ensure that they don't kind of take over the area over time. And roughly half the plants of the sanctuary area should be native to Georgia. So that's really the most important part of all of this. Really, if you really want to get into the science of everything, really you should have more than 70% of an area be native plants. But this is just like a lower threshold that we have for people kind of help out a little bit, because obviously a lot of people have non-native ornamental plants and stuff like that. It's quite an undertaking to kind of convert your space if you're starting from something that's not native at all. So we'll get into ways that you can kind of maximize the work that you do to get to that point, which I just made it sound difficult, but it's not super difficult. So yeah, basically the native plant portion of this is one of the most important details. And anyway, along with that, I should just say that generally speaking, this is a program geared towards smaller properties. So generally less than 3 acres. If it's more than 3 acres, you should reach out to me via email so that we can kind of talk about your different options. We have certified larger green spaces and stuff like that in the program before, but it's a little bit more of an undertaking. It's a lot harder to really thoroughly comb through a habitat with the detail that we want to for the program if you're larger than 3 acres. So that's why we have that limitation there. And it's important to also understand that we can certify areas as small as 50 square feet. So even if you just have 1 or 2 garden beds that are at least 50 square feet, and you just fill them with native plants, that can technically be certified in our program. And of course, we're going to encourage you to try to do that with your whole property or to try to expand that over time. But that's also another way that we can kind of give a lower bar of entry to people who really want to get started with native plants and learn a little bit more about them. Okay. So if you go to our website, I'm not going to click on this right now because I think it might mess up my presentation a little bit, but if you go to our website and you go to the conservation tab and you go to the wildlife sanctuary drop-down menu, you can get to our ArcGIS interactive wildlife sanctuary dashboard, where basically you can kind of see where all these wildlife sanctuaries are spaced out throughout the state. Currently we have 773 certified sanctuaries. It honestly might be more than that, but a lot of our old records are not super up to date. But even just those, the ones that we know for sure, that makes up over 29,000 acres. So, obviously a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by some of these larger properties that we managed to certify, but that's quite a lot of land that we've been able to help protect through this program. And generally, most of these properties are residential, but we can service all different types of properties, whether they're businesses or community gardens or any number of things, basically. All types of properties can apply to the program as long as they're the right size. So yeah, this is a really awesome tool. Basically, you can kind of zoom in and see roughly where these sanctuaries are located. You can't zoom all the way in, and you can't see who owns the property or exactly what the street address is or anything. Like the dot will disappear once you zoom in too far. But this kind of gives you just an idea of like where a lot of these areas are, what neighborhoods are most populated by these wildlife sanctuaries, things of that nature. And yeah, just a nice tool to kind of visualize some of the stuff when we didn't have that before. Okay, so it's important to, basically I'm going to run through like all, the different types of plants that we have, what's good for birds and whatnot. And to start with, I should just talk about native plant species, or just native species in general, because not everybody is super familiar with native species. There's a lot of confusion with the terms native and natural, things like that. But basically a native species is a species that has historically occurred as part of a specific ecosystem or natural community, generally for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years, and so on. These plants have co-evolved with our native fauna, and they have these really complex, intricate relationships with each other. Oftentimes involving multiple different organism species. These are really complex, food webs, and just ways that these organisms interact with each other. That if you have some non-native like hydrangea or something in your yard, maybe it's providing some nectar for local insects and things like that. But as far as like the leaves go, they're not going to be able to provide food for our native caterpillars, most of which need very specific plants called host plants, which we'll get to later. They might not be the food that's provided by these plants might not be as nutritious as their native counterparts are. The native plants might provide very specific nutrients and things like that the non-native plants might not. And just generally, they're just not as beneficial, to the environment. They might provide some benefits, but there's really no substitute for a native plant because there's, tons and tons of different ways that they service our native flora. So just a good example of that here is the American beautyberry. It's a really great native plant species. I think we have like 2 of them left in our native plant sale, but basically I really like to use this as an example because it really gets the point across of like all the different things that a native plant can do. So, it provides nectar for one. It has these really beautiful showy flowers along the stems. Those are really attractive to a lot of bees and other pollinators. It provides nectar for all kinds of different animals. Those flowers eventually turn into these beautiful purple berries that are really nutritious for a lot of our birds to eat. Something I didn't mention before is, but also if you have a non-native plant, especially a non-native invasive plant, maybe pollinators are pollinating the flowers and everything, but that just means that you're creating this like non-native, potentially invasive fruit that the birds are going to eat, and then they're going to spread that seed, to new environments, and it's actually detrimental in that way. So by having a lot of native plants and having a lot of things that produce a lot of native berries and a lot of native seeds and stuff like that, those birds are going to be eating a lot more native stuff. They're going to be spreading a lot more native stuff also. So that's really important to mention also. And then over here we have the rustic sphinx moth, which is a native moth that its caterpillars feed on American beautyberry leaves. And if you look at it, that's a pretty big, juicy caterpillar. So if you're a bird and you need to feed some insects to your young so that they can develop into adults, or even if you're just an insectivorous bird and you just really need some insects for some protein, you're going to want to visit the American beautyberry because you might find some really nice caterpillars like that. So yeah, this is just a good example of basically everything that a native plant can provide. And really, if we want to get more in the weeds, there could be more than this, but these are like the most basic ways that native plants provide for our wildlife. So it's important to talk about habitat layers and structural diversity. So, I was talking about the old growth forest earlier, fern bank forests, and they basically have all of these different layers represented. And you can see here that these different habitat layers service different birds. And especially, some of these birds may forage in one layer of the forest. They might nest in another layer. So having as many of these different vegetation layers as possible is going to end up providing for the widest array of bird species, and as well as insect species and other animals. So it's really important to kind of fill in as many of these areas as possible. You know, if you have like a native wildflower meadow, that's awesome, but you know, you might consider throwing in a couple understory trees. You know, things like that. You always want to basically look for where the gaps are in your habitat, and see if you can provide, you know, a little bit more, especially if you're like in an area that should be, you know, native forest originally. So that's just there to kind of talk a little bit about vegetation layers. And now I'll basically actually go run through those layers, talk about a few different native plants that belong to them, and just generally like why they're important to our native birds. So canopy trees are obviously, you know, some of the most important. You know, a lot of these trees service the widest number of, you know, butterfly and moth caterpillars as a host plant. So, you know, for instance, our oaks, you know, a lot of the oaks, you know, provide food for, you know, over 500 caterpillar species, which is really incredible. You know, it's more than even like our best native wildflowers and stuff like that, just in terms of volume of plants that are serviced by them, or insects that are serviced by them. So it's really important to have canopy trees if you're able to, and especially, you know, even more important if you have these really mature trees, you know, old growth trees, or just trees that have existed for over 100 years. Because as time goes on, those trees will naturally form different cavities, which will be really good nesting for a lot of native birds. You know, just in general, it's going to be better for our birds to have a lot of really big trees. It provides a lot of cover. It's maybe a safer area for them in a lot of cases. And a lot of these trees provide like a lot of you know, nuts, seeds, and things of that nature, all different kinds. Like the sweet gum produces these really tiny little seeds that, you know, some of the birds get up in the canopy, but also they drop down to the ground. And then things like mourning doves will go feeding on them. You know, obviously oaks have a lot of acorns. Pines provide a lot of nuts also. So yeah, basically just in general, canopies trees are really great to have, at least a few of them. Mid-story and understory trees. So it's really, I mean, it's important to mention that, like, you know, not all of our trees are going to reach all the way up to the highest reaches of the canopy, but also they don't necessarily have to. A lot of these plants listed here produce a lot of berries, especially in like the fall and winter time, when that's going to be really important for our birds. Some of them even provide really early spring nectar. So this eastern redbud, for instance, that's going to be like one of the earliest flowering native plants that we have. So if you're like a really early emerging like native bee or something like that, you might be going looking for some red buds to get some nectar. That might also be why this bluebird is here. Maybe it's looking for some insects that it can feed to its babies. But yeah, in general, a lot of these plants, you know, service berries, black cherries, red mulberries, they produce a ton of fruit for our native birds. And you know, some birds more than others really value that fruit, really need that fruit. So it's really important to have, you know, a lot of, you know, native fruit producing plants if possible, preferably mid and upper story trees, understory trees. We also have our native shrubs. So a lot of these also provide berries, especially in the winter time. So things like our hollies, for instance, are super important at providing those you know, nutrient-rich berries in the winter time. But just in general, you know, we have all different types of stuff. That the American beautyberry is in here. All of our native azaleas are in here. Elderberry, you know, produces tons and tons of fruit, as well as flowers before that. We have a lot of native blueberries. You know, most of you probably have pokeweed somewhere in your yard. That's one of those plants that'll just kind of naturally find its way into your yard. I don't know that it necessarily belongs in the shrubs category, but that's where we have it listed here. And so on and so forth. You know, shrubs are really important. They provide a lot of cover for our birds, and they do a lot to kind of connect the different layers of the forest. Then down to wildflowers, you know, a lot of our open, you know, sun wildflowers are what's really, you know, valued by a lot of gardeners and stuff. Like, you know, probably a lot of you are familiar with purple coneflower, for instance, which is a really great plant for wildlife. But there's all different kinds of native wildflowers, you know, and they range from ones that spring all the way early in the springtime, all the way to late summer and into fall. They provide all different kinds of, you know, nectar and fruit and seeds for our native birds. You know, a lot of our native wildflowers just naturally provide nectar for our hummingbirds. So things like this scarlet bee balm here, but also other bee balms, jewel weeds, you know, things of that nature. And also a lot of these wildflowers will also attract a lot of, you know, uncommon pollinators, or pollinators that people don't typically think of. So people usually think of like butterflies and moths and bees and things like that when it comes to pollinators. There's also all kinds of different wasps and flies and other insects that pollinate these plants. And, you know, it's really important to attract those also because, you know, a lot of those wasps are going to be natural predators for a lot of garden pests or for lawn pests or some other kind of, you know, pests that you don't want in your yard. And they could provide a lot of natural, you know, pest control benefits just by providing a lot of native plants. You can just kind of naturally do that. And then getting into ground cover, this is where we have like a lot of our like spring ephemeral plants. So, you know, if you live in Atlanta, you know, in the Piedmont region, there's a whole slew of really beautiful, amazing native plants that grow really close to the ground, and they bloom really early in the spring. In fact, before the trees have even leafed out for the year. So basically they take advantage of all that sunlight really early in the growing season in order to put out their vegetation and make their flowers and stuff like that. And that's going to be really important for a lot of our, you know, native ground nesting bees that are going to be emerging around that time. They really need a lot of nectar. And if you don't have a lot of these plants, you know, it might be really hard for them to find things they need just to keep them kind of going and you know, and starting the growing season for them. So there's all different kinds of these. You know, if you have a little stream in your backyard, some foamflower will be great for that. There's all kinds of native sedges and grasses if you want to try to replace some of your lawn with something that's native, or even just, you know, line like your walkways and stuff like that. There's all kinds of native ferns. You know, there's basically all kinds of stuff if you really go looking for it. And you can pretty much cover like every layer of the forest, you know, including the ground layer. And I think the last one we talk about are vines. So these are one of my favorite types of plants to talk about because I would say they're really highly undervalued as far as their wildlife benefits go. So, you know, most of these native vines produce really great flowers, a lot of like tubular flowers like this. I'm actually not sure if that's coral. I think that might be Cherokee bean there, or yeah, I don't know which plant that is actually now that I think about it. But you know, trumpet creeper, you know, our native honeysuckles, maybe that's coral honeysuckle. But basically, you know, a lot of them provide really great nectar for our hummingbirds. They also will eventually produce a lot of fruits. So right down here is our native muscadine grape. That's our native grape species. That fruit's going to be really highly prized by all sorts of different animals, you know, squirrels, birds, what have you. Our really beautiful purple passion flowers are a great plant also, and one of the most attractive flowers that we have. And honestly, a lot of these plants will kind of just find their way into your yard naturally. Like if you really like learn how to identify these plants and you learn like what they look like when they start as seedlings, you'll realize that you'll just have a lot of these just naturally just pop up that, you know, around your property. And it's really great for these vines to climb up your native trees, especially your canopy trees, and try to get as high into the canopy as they can, because that's where they're going to produce the most flowers. That's where they're going to produce the most fruit, and that's, you know, basically how they're going to provide the most benefit to your habitat. And another great thing about vines is that they really connect all the different layers of the forest. So, you know, they can connect insects that might not fly, or all different kinds of organisms, you know, from one layer of the forest into the other. It helps give it a lot of continuity and really kind of pulls everything together. Even things like our native poison ivy. You know, a lot of people don't like poison ivy, but it does provide a lot of cover for a lot of our native animals. It does produce fruit that you know, some of our birds like to eat. You know, even these plants that you might think of as weeds naturally, just because they show up all over your yard, really they're doing that because you know, the environment needs it. It needs as many of these native plants to be growing as possible. It wants to provide as much, you know, nectar and fruit and stuff as possible. So it's really important to kind of encourage your vines as much as possible while also controlling non-native invasive vines like English ivy and Japanese honeysuckle and things of that nature. And then just in general, again, it's really important to talk about host plants. So, you know, a lot of our butterflies and moths, their caterpillars are only going to be able to feed on very specific plants called host plants. Most of our native plants are hosts to at least some kind of native insect, whether it be, you know, caterpillars or some other kind of insect. All kinds of different insects really need host plants, but, you know, caterpillars are just the most recognized ones. But things like this Carolina chickadee, for instance, in the springtime. Okay, so it's important to talk about the fact that we do have aerial insectivores, birds that tend to specialize on feeding on insects. Things like phoebes and things like bluebirds and stuff like that. But in fact, 96% of our terrestrial bird species in North America feed or need to feed insects, in particular caterpillars, to their young in order for them to get enough protein to build, to create flight feathers and actually turn into adults. So, no matter how important, these insects are to birds as adults, pretty much all of our native birds need insects in order to get from, little hatchlings into adult birds. So again, if you have your property that you treat with all these insecticides and stuff, those birds are going to have to work really hard to find all the insects they need in order to provide for their young. And in fact, a Carolina chickadee like this, just to provide, just to raise one brood of hatchlings into adults, which I think is like 4 birds, it's going to take 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in order to make that happen. So it might be hard to even fathom like that many caterpillars, but it just goes to show you like how many insects these birds really need in their environment in order to really provide for their young. And that's why I talked about earlier, like the benchmark that you really want to try to reach eventually is over 70% native plants, because if you have like tons and tons of native plants, they're going to provide tons and tons of insects, and that's going to be a lot better for the birds. So it's really important to focus on host plants, research plants that are that provide for the widest array of native caterpillars. But also some of the more specialist ones, like our monarch butterflies, that need milkweeds, and maybe that doesn't provide for a lot of different insects, other insects, but that's really important to provide for monarchs and those more specific insects, because they're super highly threatened. In fact, the monarch butterfly just this year got listed as an endangered species, and a lot of that is just because a lot of the native milkweed has been cleared out for any number of reasons. So, it's important to have really, really diverse host plants, but also really specific ones, and kind of have a good mix of all that stuff in your yard if possible. Real quick, I just want to talk about invasive plants. So, not all non-native plants are invasive. An invasive species is basically a non-native species that actively displaces or harms native wildlife or native plants and habitat, and it can provide all different kinds of harm. It could be economic harm, it could be environmental harm, or even harm to human health. And basically, a very common feature of these plants is that they grow and reproduce rapidly. A lot of them start growing earlier in the year and finish growing later in the year than our native plants. So if you're not really on top of things in the wintertime, it can make it so it can make it so those invasive plants can kind of take over and really like spread even more. So they provide a really huge slew of negative effects for our native birds. So it's really important to talk about invasive plants because not everybody is familiar. And honestly, a lot of these plants you can just buy from a Lowe's or Home Depot or some other nursery without even realizing it. So just looking at this list here, I can talk about some of those plants. Like you can get English ivy at a store. You can get, let's see, you can probably get Nandina at a store. You can definitely get like liriope or monkey grass at a store. All these different plants that there's not currently any bans on them here in the state of Georgia. So people will just go to a nursery, or they'll have a landscaper kind of decide what plants get planted in their yard. And oftentimes, a lot of these plants are really cheap because they just reproduce like crazy. If you really wanted to, you could probably go to any native habitat and find these plants for free. I definitely don't want you to do that, but that just goes to show you like how common these plants are, and that's why they're so cheap, and that's why so many landscapers turn to them, as well as just maybe not being as well versed in native plants as people who specialize in that area. So we have all different kinds of invasive plant species. A lot of the worst ones are vines and kind of like understory, like shrubs and grasses and things like that. But we also have some invasive trees, definitely like privet. It's typically like a shrub, but it can definitely get to be tree size. Our mimosas or silk trees, princess trees, All these trees you'll find kind of all over once you really are able to recognize them. But definitely, I would say the most noxious, the most damaging ones are the vines and other invasive plants. Other things that we look at, other than native plants, invasive plants, and turf grass in people's habitats, are food sources, water sources, and cover and nesting sources. So you have to have a certain number of each of these. I think it's 4 food sources. You have to have at least 4 cover and nesting sources and at least 1 water source, all of which you should be maintaining as they're supposed to be. For food, if you think about it, if you have like a fully native ecosystem and you have like the most pristine, perfect native habitat there is, you really don't have a need for feeders. Feeders are really great for, if you're trying to learn your birds, or if you're trying to fill a gap. Maybe you don't have a lot of native seed producing plants in your yard. So it might be good to have feeders to kind of fill that food gap until you can kind of introduce those plants. But the thing with feeders is that they have to be maintained, they have to be cleaned regularly, and not everybody has time to clean them regularly. Some people leave that seed in there for way too long and it gets really moldy and gross, and that's really negative to bird health. And also some of these perches can really harbor all sorts of different microorganisms that are really unsafe for birds if you're not really on top of cleaning them. So more than anything, we try to encourage people to identify plants that produce wide arrays of food for our native birds and try to include those. But if you do have to have feeders, you should try to maintain them regularly and make sure they stay clean. I think our guidelines on regular tube feeders and other seed feeders are to clean them at least once a week, as well as dump out the food. But you can find more information about that online. Hummingbirds specifically need nectar, so they require a different type of feeder if you're trying to include feeders in your yard. These need to be cleaned even more regularly and need to be replaced even more regularly, especially if they're in direct sunlight, because that sugar water will go bad and spoil. But even if it's not in direct sunlight, you should really be replacing it every 1 to 4 days, because it can get really nasty really quick, basically. But with that said, we have all these different native plants that provide nectar just naturally for the hummingbirds. So we have some of the vines like the trumpet vine, the cross vine, coral honeysuckle, like I mentioned before. But we also have a lot of really beautiful native plants like the cardinal flower, our bee balms, our jewel weeds, things of that nature. There's all different kinds of native plants that will provide the nectar if you really want to. It's important to talk about water sources. So, we require people to have at least 1 water source on their property to be certified by us. Some people are lucky enough to have like a creek that just runs through their backyard, in which case that's kind of already taken care of. But a lot of times people have to create these water sources in one way or another. The higher end way of doing things is to have either a pond or a circulating stream or a fountain of some kind that provides running water. And those you can really landscape with all kinds of riparian or native plants that really enjoy being near water sources like that. That's really great if you can afford that. But if not, most people have a bird bath of some kind. It's important to talk about the bird baths, though, that birds need to be able to perch on the bird bath in order to use it. So if you just have the basin with nothing inside of it, really those birds can only perch on the edge of the basin because they need somewhere to stand in order to use the water and in order to bathe themselves. So something that we tend to recommend people to do is to insert different size stones or different size platforms in the basin of the bird bath to basically allow for a wider range of birds to make use of it. Some people even just honestly drape a tree branch or a twig or something over the top of the bird bath. Even just doing that's going to provide more places for the birds to land on of different sizes and to actually make use of that water. Of course, with bird baths, it's important to replace that water super often, probably between 1 and 4 days, in order to prevent muck buildup and also mosquito breeding and stuff like that. You can also include a circulating feature. Any kind of bubbling water sounds are super attractive to birds, and also do a lot to help keep that water a little bit cleaner. So that's definitely another thing you can add to that. And then this one on the top left is actually a really cool one that we saw at one of our sanctuaries, where basically someone just had this circulating water system where this tube fed water and it just ran over this rock surface with all these different grooves in it. And basically that allows a lot of birds to kind of land on it and bathe or do whatever they need to do access that water. And even just doing something like that, something super simple and not super in the way or anything, can provide a lot to our birds in the way of water. And then shelter, or specifically cover nesting sources. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. Obviously you can provide nest boxes, which I'll show you guys a really awesome resource for doing that a little bit later in this presentation. But out of all these things, mature trees, tree cavities, like I talked about before, dense shrubs and thickets, rock piles, evergreen plants, all these different things, they're all important, but the things I really want to focus on here are dead trees and logs and leaf litter. These are some of the most important things that you can provide in your habitat, and you'll find that if you have some type of standing dead wood or fallen dead wood on your property, or you maintain that leaf litter year-round, you're going to find a lot more bird activity on your property, most likely. So dead trees are really important because over 30 species of birds native to Georgia use their cavities to nest. So all of our woodpeckers, but also nuthatches, chickadees, bluebirds, and some owls. If you can leave any amount of standing dead wood in your property, as long as it's not like a threat to your house or anything like that, we really recommend to do that because it's really hard to replace that type of habitat. And also, like even if you have, like, let's say you do have like a big canopy tree and it needs to be removed from your property, even leaving 20, 30 feet of that trunk, enough of the trunk that it can still provide for the birds, while also not being a threat to any like nearby buildings. Even just doing that is doing a lot to help maintain this habitat for birds. Because if you just were to cut down these trees and ship off the wood to somewhere else, you're getting rid of like basically all the nutrients from that tree that can go back into the soil. You're getting rid of all this habitat and food for the native insects that these woodpeckers, for instance, are probably going after, but also nesting cavities for these birds. You're removing a whole lot more than you probably think you are when you're removing dead trees from your property. And actually, before I move on too quickly, also fallen dead wood is also really good because all of those nutrients that the tree takes up during its life, if you allow that wood to decompose naturally on top of the soil, that's going to return most of those nutrients back into the soil, and it's going to ensure that you have like a really healthy topsoil for a lot of these plants to grow in. Because honestly, like a lot of our native plants, some of them are super hardy and can grow just about anywhere. They're a little bit more weedy like that, but some of the more sensitive native plants definitely need like really healthy topsoil with a lot of nutrients. So it's important to provide that, and that's also going to provide a lot of habitat and cover and all sorts of things for reptiles, amphibians, insects, all sorts of things. So really important to have dead trees in your property in any way possible. Leaf litter is also super underrated in terms of its value to our birds. So for instance, if you have a brown thrasher right there that, they frequently like to forage in leaf litter to look for insects and other, small organisms to eat. That's our state bird. So you definitely want to, try to provide for that if you're able to. But you'll notice that all different kinds of birds will really make use of that leaf litter, and they'll be looking for insects to feed on, or seeds or any number of things. Leaf litter is incredibly important for tons of different reasons, but basically it's natural fertilizer for your soil. All those leaves are going to decompose and return nutrients back into the soil. But it's also going to be overwintering habitat for our native insects. So ensuring that those insects can kind of survive into the next year. It's going to provide a lot of cover for our amphibians and our reptiles and stuff like that. Honestly, it's going to also just provide a warm place on your property for all these organisms to be in the wintertime. So if you got rid of all of your leaf litter, let's say you have some roaches outside, they're going to be looking for somewhere warm to stay. And if they don't have any leaf litter out in your yard, they're going to probably go into your house because that's where it's going to be warmest. So leaf litter is super underrated in terms of its quality to its value to wildlife. You want to leave as much of it as possible wherever you can. If you do have to leaf blow certain areas, you should at least have a leaf pile, or disperse those leaves throughout your shrubs, like under your shrubs and between plantings. You basically just want to avoid like putting them in giant bags on the curb to go to some landfill or something like that, because you have so much natural resources, natural fertilizer that you don't have to pay for, that you can just provide to your habitat. for free. So it's really important to talk about native leaf litter or natural leaf litter. And then also just like, brush piles, rock piles, all these different other kinds of like messy areas that may be unsightly to us are going to be really important to birds. They'll provide all sorts of cover and nesting opportunities for them. So, even if you have to like put these brush piles like between or behind some shrubs or something like that, as long as you have it somewhere on the property, that's going to be doing a lot to provide for these birds. And then the next thing we talk about with the Wildlife Sanctuary Program are safe wildlife practices. So for the most part, these are not required aspects of the Wildlife Sanctuary like application process. I say that with the exception being this first point, which I'll get into a little bit later. But for the most part, these are just things that are really important to bird health that not everybody is super well versed in, and things that we like to try to educate people about as much as possible. So right now, for instance, it's really important to talk about minimal outdoor lighting. So, right now we're in fall migration. Millions of birds are passing overhead every night in Georgia to get where they need to go for the winter. Basically, having a lot of outdoor light pollution is going to make it really hard for a lot of those birds that need, the sun, or that need the moon or the stars for navigation. If you have a lot of lights that are producing a lot of, or are shooting a lot of light into the air, that's going to be really distracting for our native birds, as well as things like fireflies and insects and whatnot also. So we try to encourage minimal outdoor lighting as much as possible during the migration season. So during spring and fall migration, you should try to have your lights off from midnight to 6 a.m. during those periods. And just generally, it's good to have, like, if you do have to have outdoor lighting, it should be motion sensing, or you should just be really on top of, not letting that light stay on all night, basically. It's super important to talk about that. We also encourage little to no chemical pesticide use. Obviously those can have really detrimental effects to our birds and other organisms. Like I said, you definitely don't want to spray for mosquitoes on your property, because that's going to kill all the insects. That's going to be really terrible for your native birds and stuff like that. Sometimes like certain things call for very specific, highly specified like uses of chemicals. Like if you have a giant privet tree that you have no way of digging out of the ground, like sometimes you can cut the stump and then treat that with an herbicide. There are a lot of less invasive ways to use chemicals if you really need to. But generally speaking, you should avoid using chemicals on your lawn. You should try to not spray any insecticides on the property, anything like that. It's also important to talk about bird collisions. So window collisions are a really high cause of direct bird death. Here in North America, windows are not naturally occurring things, in nature. Birds, when they see a window, the reflection they see in the window of some woods or whatever, they just perceive that as more wood. So, if you have your feeders, positioned in such a way that they're, between like 3 and 30 feet away from your windows, and like a hawk or a predator of some kind comes through, that might spook the birds and it might send them flying off in a certain direction. And if they see a window and they just see a reflection for a lot of forest on the other side, they're going to go straight into that window and they can very easily injure or even kill themselves. So it's very important to talk about bird collisions. Generally, people just have like 1 or 2 problem windows. There might be something very specific about the way the light hits the windows or where your feeders are that is causing the problem. And there's all different kinds of ways that you can kind of solve that. There's all kinds of like decals you can buy online to kind of break up the reflection in your windows. Sometimes even just adding like an insect screen or something like that is enough to break up the shadows. So there's a lot of different things you can do if you do notice that being a problem on your property. And finally, we recommend limited leaf blower and mower usage. So leaf blowers and leaf mowers use a really highly polluting type of engine. In fact, it's more polluting than our personal vehicles are, because they have a lot of very complex methods of kind of reducing those greenhouse gases. But leaf blowers and mowers are just really terrible for that. They produce a lot of pollution in terms of like greenhouse gases, but also a lot of noise pollution. So it's going to be really hard for birds to communicate with each other when leaf blowers and mowers are going off. Those leaf blowers might injure any insects that are like in that leaf litter. Similarly, mowing your lawn, super often It's going to make it less attractive to like ground nesting native bees, like bumblebees, for instance. So, any amount of limiting your leaf blowers and mowers is going to be good for, for wildlife. We try to recommend people to, if you do have to mow, your lawn, to try to mow it in sections so that you're not just mowing everything every week. Same with leaf blowing, try to minimize that as much as possible. Maybe get an electric leaf blower if you really have to leaf blow, or maybe just rake things the good old fashioned way. Try to limit that stuff as much as possible is going to be really good because, yeah, again, they're just super polluting and also disturbing to a lot of native wildlife. Okay, so I said I would talk about cats, and this is really important to talk about for some of you that may have outdoor cats. Cats are the #1 leading direct cause of bird death in North America. In fact, they kill 2.6 billion birds in North America every single year. Which is really crazy. If you think about it, the fact that we have 2.9 billion fewer breeding birds since 1970, if you're having 2.6 billion birds killed every year by these outdoor cats, that's obviously like a super big, it just further adds to the impact. The biggest drivers are habitat loss and habitat degradation, but there are also things that directly cause bird death, and they're important to talk about. So, if you have a cat that you let outdoors, we try to recommend to not let it go outdoors, or, if you have to give it some outside time, to honestly put it on a leash and supervise your cat that way. Some people have converted their patios into what people call catios, where they'll allow their cats to be in a screened-in porch, so they can still, get some fresh air and also, look around and get the enjoyment of the feeling like they're outside without fully being outside. And just generally try to not feed or maintain outdoor cats because, that's just going to extend their lifespans, and it's going to make it so that they're just killing more birds as time goes on. So outdoor cats are super important to talk about. It's again, the leading direct cause of bird death, even more than windows and all these other things. So it's really important to talk about that. With that said, windows and all these other things still are really bad for bird health. Like, if you think about it, especially in Atlanta, downtown, midtown Atlanta, so many of those buildings are just entirely glass windows, basically. And again, if you're those birds on the east side trying to get to the west side or vice versa, that's going to be a really risky barrier for you to pass by. So windows are cause a lot of bird deaths. Vehicles, planes, cars, trains, what have you. All those also directly harm birds, and also just industrial collisions, resource extraction, things of that nature that also kills millions of birds every year. And then the last thing we like to talk about with the sanctuary program is having a sanctuary maintenance plan in place. So it's important to understand that once you plant a bunch of native plants, that's really not the end of what your work is for that space. You have to actively remove non-native invasive plants because they'll just make their way into your yard just naturally. They might exist in the seed bank already, so removing invasive plants might have more native plant or invasive plants pop up again. So you have to really stay on top of things. Generally, it's best to do that in the winter time when it's really cool and there's not a lot of native plants to get confused by. Frequently cleaning your feeders and bird baths is also super important for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Seasonally cleaning out your nest boxes. Sometimes people are able to just kind of leave their nest boxes for year after year, but those nests can get really moldy and dirty, so it's important to clear those out right before springtime. And also just to add new native species as time goes on. You could have a really beautiful, wonderful native habitat that has like 50 native plants, and that provides a lot of stuff, for your local wildlife. But we've seen properties that have over 200 native species, and upwards from that. So there's always more that you can add to your property if you really want to, and just having a plan in place, like, okay, this year I'm going to add some native shrubs. This year I'm going to add some native grasses, like things like that. Like having like a plan in place to kind of improve the area more and more and more over time is just going to really help you to get to where you want to be. If you want to check out some certified wildlife sanctuaries, these are some like public properties that you can go to that have been certified in the program. One of the most recent ones is Mary Scott Nature Park. If you attended our sanctuary tour last week, a couple weeks ago, that is one of our more recent certified green spaces. That's I wrote Briarcliff here because it's kind of between North Druid Hills and Brookhaven, but that's a really awesome place, especially to learn native plants. They have a lot of like species signs along the trail, so you can kind of learn your plant names and things like that. They have really awesome like little garden area out front in the parking lot. You know, it's really important to visit these places that have really high quality native habitats, because that'll help give you ideas basically for your own yard. And honestly, like even if if you see some seeds or something that these plants are putting out, you can harvest some of that seed and bring it back to your home and grow plants that way. So we have all different kinds of public areas that you can go to. These are just some of them listed here. And it's important to really try to focus on a small area first when you're getting started with this, because if you have 3 acres, it's going to be really daunting to try to convert the entire space all at once into a native wildflower sanctuary or wildlife sanctuary. So we generally try to recommend to identify an area that you want to serve as your sanctuary, like the very first spot that you want to work with. Generally, it's going to be a place where you already have native plants. So if you have a lot of native canopy trees, but you don't have anything else in the area, you want to start in that area and try to add some part shade and full shade native plants into the understory. You'll want to identify non-native invasive plants in the area and begin their removal process. Again, wintertime is the best time to do that, and you're going to want to throw out any plants that have seeds or berries on them. You're going to want to plant native plants that are suitable for your area. So you're going to want to look at the type of soil moisture that you have, like whether you're in a really bottomland, low, wet area, or like really high, upper, kind of dry area. But also, the amount of sunlight you get. Like a lot of people think that you need open sun for a lot of native plants, but that's not true. There's all kinds of part shade and full shade native plants that are well adapted to our native forests. So you can definitely fill in, pretty much whatever type of environment you have. Like I guarantee there's going to be some native plants that you could include in there. They're well suited to it. You just want to make sure that it's appropriate for the type of place you're putting them in. And then finally, you want to add features that are beneficial to wildlife. Small things like adding dead wood on the ground, standing dead wood. Having leaf litter, having brush piles, all these sorts of different things are all going to be super beneficial. Where to get native plants? So as Dottie mentioned earlier, we still have our fall native plant sale underway. You will notice that quite a few species have sold out, but there definitely are some species that we still have plenty of stock with. That's all online on our website. We've Dottie linked it already, so you can go on our website and find that plant sale. I think that's ending pretty soon here. Yeah, I believe next week is when we close the sale and kind of get everything started on our back end about getting the plants ready for the plant pickup weekend, which is going to be October 1st in the Athens area and October 2nd in the Atlanta area. For that sale, we partner with Beach Hollow Wildflower Farm, which is a really amazing native nursery. Everything that they sell are native plants. It's 100% native. And also they don't even have any native cultivars or anything that's like super highly modified from what they are naturally. They have a lot of native wild plant species to choose from, and they're super knowledgeable and they can help you out a lot on what plants you want to include. But yeah, there's also all different kinds of areas that you can get native plants from. And if you go to the State Botanical Garden website or the Georgia Native Plant Society website, you can find lists there as well of native nurseries. So yeah, I'll get into a few more resources right after this slide. We are wrapping up here, but I just want to mention real quick, you can certify your yard with us if you apply to the Wildlife Sanctuary Program. You do have to be a Georgia Audubon member first and foremost in order to enter the program, because being a member, funds everything that we do, from conservation to education to community engagement. And on top of that, you're going to want to fill out an application for either in-person assessment if you're in the Atlanta or Athens metro areas, or a virtual assessment if you're elsewhere in the state. And basically you're going to have that assessment, you're going to get your recommendations for what to do to your property, and you'll get your verdicts about whether you're certified or not. And then we'll do everything we can to kind of help you towards certification in due time. So yeah, I definitely recommend you guys to apply to the program. You do want to keep in mind though that we don't do any assessments during the winter time. And that's because there's not a lot of native plants to look at. It's going to be really hard to kind of gauge what you have in your environment. So the program does take a hiatus for the winter time. If you go to our website, if you go to that conservation tab and down to wildlife sanctuary program, and then over to the side, you'll find like a sanctuary or a resources page. But that's also where you're going to find, the page to apply for the program. It's also where you're going to find our requirements for the program, so you can kind of get well versed in that beforehand. You can also find resources for our Plants for Birds brochure. You can find best management practices information. You can find information about native plants, non-native plants, also different kinds of stuff directly from our website. There's also other websites you can visit, like the Guide to Natural Communities in North Georgia. This is a really awesome website that I'm not sure if they have all of these different areas filled in yet, but again, if you're in the Atlanta area, if you go to the Piedmont tab on this website, it'll just give you a full list of native plants that you can include in your yard. And that's a really great resource for learning a little bit more about those native plants. If you go to the National Audubon website and you enter your zip code into the native plants database, that'll give you a list of native plants that would be applicable to your area. If you are already certified in our sanctuary program and you want to, try to challenge yourself to get to the next tier or what have you, Georgia Native Plant Society has its own habitat certification program, so you can apply to theirs. I believe their highest level certification is 2/3 of your area should be native plants. So if you already meet our requirements and you want to rack up a few different signs and really challenge yourself to make it even better, I recommend applying to that program. Georgia Native Plant Society in general is just a really amazing organization. They do all sorts of native plant rescues that you can attend and get some really cool rare plants that might be slated for demolition for whatever type of development. They do a lot of awesome, great educational work and conservation work, so definitely check them out also. eBird is a great place to learn about birds in general. I won't get too into it, but the Merlin app is a really great way to learn your birds and your bird calls. You can also visit the Nest Watch website. This is the website I alluded to earlier, where basically they have a list of like tons of different bird species. You click on whichever one you want to build a nest for. It'll give you blueprints for the birdhouse. It'll tell you what you should put the birdhouse on. It'll tell you how high to put the birdhouse, what direction to face it. Pretty much anything you can think of. It's going to really walk you through the process of building those nest boxes for yourself. And finally, I just recommend you guys to join us. Become a Georgia Audubon member. Like I said, you need to in order to enter the Wildlife Sanctuary program, but just in general, it's a pretty low bar of entry, and there's a lot of great benefits that come with it, and it really supports all the work that we do. If you really are well versed in native plants already, you can become an avian advocate volunteer certifier in our Wildlife Sanctuary program. For that, you'll want to reach out to me directly. You can find my email at the end of this. You can also assist with our habitat restoration projects. If you go to the volunteer tab on our website, I believe you can find the full calendar of habitat restoration projects. That's a great place to learn about invasive plants, learn about native plants, to really help us do the work that we're trying to do as far as making these really important areas more native over time. You can become a master birder. You can enter a master birder program, of which I personally took the course last year, and it was really great. So you can take the master birder course and get the certification as a master birder and learn a lot about native birds. You can also participate in our sanctuary tour. If you end up being in the program, you have a really amazing property, you might be eligible to be part of the sanctuary tour, and invite people over to your house the day of the tour and kind of show them around, and they get to learn from you directly about what they can do for their property. And finally, join us on our field trips. We have tons of free field trips all throughout the state. Yeah, those are free. They're a really great place to meet other birders and learn about plants and birds and whatnot. So definitely go check us out also. And that is it. I finally reached the end of this PowerPoint. I went a little bit longer than I meant to, but you can find my email right there at the bottom. Or if you just go to our staff page on our website, that has my email listed there. That's our office phone number. Like I said, we're kind of transitioning out of the office. So if you call the office phone number, you might not get as quick of a response as if you email one of us. But then that's also our website there, where you can find all the stuff I talked about already. And that is everything. So I will end end that presentation, stop sharing my screen, and it looks like we have...
Great. Thanks so much, Alex.
Yeah.
A lot of great information there. We have a lot of questions that I'm going to try to hurry through. Several people have asked if we have any resources for certifying your yard, or for landscape companies that can come out and certify and help you plan your yard or plant your yard. Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, in fact, I should have had that slide somewhere in this presentation, but I will pull up another one super quickly. You know, it's definitely a growing field. I would say there's more and more every year people who specialize in this sort of thing. In the past, we've worked with Convivial Landscapes to put native plant gardens on school properties. I know they do a lot of this sort of work. But let's see if I can locate that real quick. Backyard Wildlife Habitats, Georgia. That is another website or another company that's been recommended to me as far as native landscaping goes. ATL Nativescapes is another one. I believe Servescape is another one I learned about recently. They seem to be doing some of that sort of work. I just certified a place that they design, so I can say that that they do a decent job at building those areas. So yeah, you can check all those out if you really don't know quite what you want to put in those areas. There are a number of companies, and if you just search for native landscapers in Atlanta, you might be able to find that just by Googling also. Yeah.
Okay, so does Audubon have any kind of suggested script for homeowners to use with HOAs about the benefits of reducing lawn and adding meadow type grasses that may not match the majority of other homes in the neighborhood?
Yeah, it's really tough. The HOAs are definitely like a pretty big barrier for a lot of people. You know, I would say it depends on the HOA and like how strict the rules are. Like some people are able to have like little islands in the middle of their lawn where they are able to put a lot of native plants. You know, they typically prefer something that's really clean looking. I mean, honestly, like the messier looking the habitat, usually the better it is for birds. But honestly, even just like adding little like native plant islands like that, sometimes that can kind of get past the HOAs. And if those islands are at least 50 square feet and you don't have to put too much noxious stuff into your lawn, you might be able to include stuff there. But yeah, if you look online, you can find all kinds of resources for just like how harmful and damaging lawn care is for the environment. If you think about fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides, all sorts of stuff you have to include. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there if you really go looking for it. But yeah, I'm not sure that I have like any like prepared script, unfortunately, for presenting to people. But if you do have a local garden club or something like that, you can actually contact us to have us speak at your local garden club or even your HOA, and we can actually do those presentations for a fee.
Great. The next question is, how much is it to have someone come and assess and make suggestions for a native garden space?
Yeah, so to apply to the program, first you have to be a Georgia Audubon member. I believe the lowest membership rate is $35 a year. And then as far as the wildlife sanctuary application goes, currently for a virtual assessment of your property, for a private property, it's $50. And that's basically like a video call, like you're gonna connect to someone like over FaceTime or Zoom or something like that. And you're gonna have to like walk through your property and show us things that way. But definitely if you're in range for, if you're basically like in the Atlanta or Athens metro area, you'll want to apply for an in-person assessment. For one thing, our volunteers definitely prefer to do in-person assessments. It's a lot more fun for them to physically go out to people's yards. And that's going to be basically $75. So it's a little bit more expensive than the virtual option is, but it's definitely worth it if you can afford it. So yeah, $35 for membership at the base level, and then either $50 or $75 depending.
Somebody's asking a question about you referenced morning glories, and they thought that morning glories were not native. Is there a native variety of morning glories?
I believe Man of the Earth is a native morning glory that is native up here. Morning glories, though, it's definitely more like a coastal plains type of plant. So there are definitely areas of South Georgia that I'm pretty sure there are native morning glories. But yeah, for the most part, like up here in like the Piedmont region, or especially North Georgia, you're not going to find many morning glories. That's just a very specific type of area.
What do we do if we have a lot of Joro spiders? Are they harmful to our native ecosystem?
So yeah, Joro spiders are a really sticky subject. If you think about it, spiders just generally are predatory organisms. So in general, like having a lot more non-native spiders in the area is going to mean a lot more predatory pressure for native insects and stuff like that. So, just like on a logical level, like we can probably surmise that that's probably not a good thing to have those in our natural environments. I would say that there's not super clear-cut data to show like how impactful Joro spiders are at like displacing native organisms or anything like that. But yeah, I would say that we can kind of infer that they're not great. And honestly, I'm not sure like how much to suggest to you as far as like what to do about it. Like you could just kill them, but you do want to make sure that they are Joro spiders and that they're not like a golden silk orb weaver or something like that, like some sort of native spider that might look similar.
If you do a search on Google too, the University of Georgia, I know, is doing a study on the Joro spiders, and you can probably find some more information on that. Just do a Google search, type Joro spider Georgia and UGA, and you'll probably come up with it.
Yep.
Is it acceptable to have untreated mulch in the sanctuary area in a small zone where nearby native ground cover will eventually grow in over it?
Untreated mulch. Yeah, I mean, having like mulch that hasn't been like, colored or like sprayed with chemicals and stuff like that should be fine. Like if you have like a tree that some of it gets chopped up into mulch, sometimes that's a good base for like growing like a native garden bed. You do want to be really careful though, because fresh mulch chips can pull a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. So you want to make sure you have like a pile of that mulch somewhere for honestly months at a time, like 6+ months for it to really decompose a whole lot. But once you have that, you'll have like a really awesome fertilizer basically for your soil for plants to grow on top of. But yeah, I don't know that like untreated mulch is like necessarily a problem as far as I'm aware.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. A lot of people are asking about mosquitoes. Are there any safe ways to eliminate mosquitoes from your landscape without spraying? And are mosquito dunks, water features safe for birds, or should they be avoided?
Yeah, so as far as backyard spraying goes, or spraying for mosquitoes, yeah, like I said before, it's really, really bad. And one of the things that you can do to ensure that you have less mosquitoes and that things like that is basically to again really maintain your bird baths and stuff like that, so that they don't they're not breeding spots for your mosquitoes. If you have like a lot of like English ivy, for instance, that's going to puddle a lot of water in those areas, and that's going to also be a place for mosquitoes to breed. If you have like old discarded tires, any sort of like thing like reservoir that holds water in your property, that's going to attract more mosquitoes. And honestly, just not having clean waterways is also going to be really attracting to mosquitoes. So trying to clean up your environment as much as possible is going to help, for one thing. But also having tons of native plants, attracting a lot of native birds, that's going to increase the more birds that eat those mosquitoes and kind of keep those numbers down naturally. So that's really important. Yeah, honestly, just like providing for other native insects and stuff are going to keep those mosquito numbers down. Another thing you could do is add bird boxes if it makes sense to your property, because bats really like to eat mosquitoes also. So there's a number of things that you can do, but generally speaking, like if you have a really amazing native ecosystem, you're probably not going to have as many problems as if you have like a really, I don't know, a yard that has tons of like standing water everywhere.
Combining two questions here regarding cats. Any suggestions for keeping cats out of the yard? And what do you suggest for cats that are in the neighborhood that might not be necessarily in your yard?
So yeah, it's really difficult. As far as like the program, the wildlife sanctuary program goes, we just tell people that like, as long as you're not actively feeding or maintaining those outdoor cats, we really can't fault you for it, because it is hard to keep cats out of your yard. I mean, if you really wanted to, there might be some sort of, really complex like fencing system to keep them out of your yard. But generally, there's not going to be really any good way to do that other than, talking to your neighbors and trying to educate them about how harmful outdoor cats are to native birds and other, native mammals and stuff like that also. Yeah, there's honestly not a whole lot you can do to keep them out of your yard, unfortunately, which further compounds how awful they are. So yeah, I definitely just recommend trying to talk to your neighbors as much as possible. If there's like a local like feral cat colony, there might be something to do about that also. So you might want to check with like your local county about things that can be done about that. But yeah, there's not a whole lot you can do to keep them out of your habitat.
One of our participants, I just dropped it in the chat box, says that the Georgia Native Plant Society has a list on their website of landscapers who plant native plants, and I dropped that in the chat box. So if you're interested in that, go look in the chat box and go to that website so you can save it. It is 8:30 and we need to wrap this up. We are recording this presentation and it will be available on our YouTube channel probably early next week. So please feel free to just search Georgia Audubon on YouTube sometime next week and you'll be able to find this presentation. We're going to wrap it up here. We've been at this for an hour and a half and we appreciate your time and appreciate everybody coming out. If you have additional questions that did not get answered, please feel free to reach out to Alex. Her email is alex.locastro@georgiaaudubon.org. And we thank you all for coming this evening. And thanks, Alex. That was very informative.
Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye,
and yeah, reach out to me anytime.